That just syncs the audio. It looks mad professional. I need to get one of those clappers, right?
Yeah.
When I get one of those clappers, I'm gonna feel
an
like
auto cue as well, mate.
Yeah. Maybe a little behind the TV, just so we say all the right stuff.
Yeah.
You're not gonna say any wrong stuff, though,
No,
are
I
you?
hope not.
Exactly.
I'm not gonna swear.
Exactly, 100%. We got full confidence because today we're talking about some big business. We're talking about planning gain, right?
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about brownfield, greenfield. We're going to be talking about how you how you actually can secure a deal, the level of funding that it takes to secure a deal, and loads of great things. So if you're not already, make sure you're subscribed because this is another episode of the Property by Kazy podcast. Now, each and every week, we have a different property professional on board, which means we have not just years, we have hundreds of years of experience all coming together to provide you with a great base of knowledge. And this week is like every other week, we've got a great guest. So we have Jermone from Property Planning Gain, and he's going to talk to us all about his speciality, which is, as the description would recommend, that it is planning grains. So Jerome, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right, Kazy.
How far have you come down from today?
I've come down from Manchester, especially for you.
I appreciate you. I'm sure they appreciate you. So thank you. How was the journey?
Yeah, smooth. The train only takes just over 2 hours. So yeah, it was good.
That's good.
I listened to a podcast on the way down.
Was it the Property by Kazy podcast?
Of course it was.
Of course, he's lying, but fair enough. So, if you haven't already checked out his episode on Ask Somebody Else, that was on the Instagram, and that was a great insight and a bit of background into Jerome. Now, I think for those who haven't checked it out yet, and people that kind of want to know where you came from and how you got to where you are now, can we get a brief little summary of like sort of where you started in property?
Yeah, sure. I started in property in estate agency, making the tea and doing the photocopying. Back when you can make money as an estate agent, I think.
Well, I think do you know what? I think it's I know that estate agents are very portal led, but I know, from in different estate agencies, the ones that have a good structure, and there are some good structures, I still know people doing 5 figures over their busier months in estate agencies, which is a very handsome salary considering, UK average is probably just over double that.
Yeah,
in terms of annually, so people are making it monthly is still good.
Yeah, I mean, it's like now it strikes me as that everyone's just charging less and less fees. And I don't understand how you can make a margin if you're charging 1%, even if you're selling something for £1 million. When you take off your marketing costs, your labour, your fixed costs, your energy costs, everything, your rental rates, but that's not what we used to do.
Yeah, I think definitely, there is a conversation that the typical model potentially is struggling with that level of overheads, and people are focusing more on volume. But at the same time, you've also seen people like the Tyrone Ash models come into play, which have more of a American model in terms of higher fees, but we're going to get you that number, we're going to give you the service. So I think it's an interesting space, definitely, that right now in the estate agencies as a whole, it's definitely a developing space. And that's somebody actually, and we're going to get our editor to write this down, we should get somebody from Tyrone Ash on to talk about actually how they're doing as well. But we're not here to talk about them. Sure. We're here to talk about you. So you started off making tea, and you've developed slightly since then.
Yeah, making tea, doing some photocopying, set up on my own, got a shop front just behind Baker Street, so central London. I was 24, didn't have a business plan, had no model, there was no formal training, there was no education, there were no books on how to set up an estate agency. I just winged it, right? Which is what I believe we're all still doing. We're just getting better at it. And I set that up in 97. Tony Blair had just got in, first Labour government for decades. And everything kicked off, like the economy and stuff. And got a shop front. The rent was about 12, 13 grand a year rent. 3 or 4 grand a year business rates. Residential, drop flyers indoors, like old school way of doing it. Before smartphones, we had email.
Fancy.
It's crazy saying this stuff.
Do you know what? But even, because I'm 32 now, like, so I was on the cusp of the .com boom in terms of, when I was my first job, one of my first jobs was in the solicitors. And, solicitors still use faxes, to be fair. The only people that do still use them, but like fax was a real thing. We were still on dial-up internet, the old sounds. But yeah, it's definitely a real change. Like, I think for someone like you, just about me, but people that are now 20 years old, that were born in 2000 and something, they don't know the world without internet, let alone without, email. So it's definitely a different changing model.
What I found with what you've just said is that I find people can't communicate. I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of younger people struggle to talk on the telephone. I don't know how you find this, right? You probably deal with agents a lot more than I do. I reckon, because of what your niche is. But yeah, I think communication is a real issue for people.
I think definitely, like, from the people that I speak to, particularly written communication, because we're so used to text talk and slang, that that transferring to actually having to write, because the art of, I'm definitely not the artist as somebody who's severely dyslexic, but the art of penmanship and being able to write, is definitely sort of a dying art. I think the ability to communicate, potentially because we do spend so much time on our phones, is maybe something that has changed slightly. But that being said, I do think that there's always a trade-off between when you lose one skill, you learn another. So because although maybe the ability to have a conversation, like, there may be some areas where you could say that's depreciating. I'd say because people are confident enough now, you see that people spend a lot of time talking to themselves into their smartphone, people's ability to deliver a speech almost, or to sell themselves in that regards. And I think, you have to move with the times as well in terms of what skill sets are going to set you apart.
Yeah, the last 2 years, I've had a number of young people work with me. 17 years old, 19 years old at the moment, and a 26-year-old that had just got a first class in a master's. He couldn't communicate.
And I think particularly in property, that as much as it moves on and we talk about, because we spoke to a guy called Lee from Truly Estate Agents, and he spoke about the importance of, he still goes back to basics. So he turns off the computers once a week, prints out the leads and right, you got to call everybody, sit down and go old school. And I think the ability to do that and to be able to operate in different settings is really important, because even as though things change, property is still a people business. Like, a lot of the time it's really a people business, and built, like, more than anything else, it's about building relationships. Because sometimes you can get a deal, you can secure an option because that person likes you. If you're at a similar ballpark when it comes to numbers, It comes down to who do you buy into, and who somebody buys into is often from the conversation. So I do think you're really right that as a skill, if you are looking to get into property, beyond your education, beyond knowing real specifics, communication is a real skill that, are you saying that from your experience people should work on?
Yeah, to the point where I'm even thinking of starting a course and teaching people how to speak on the telephone. I feel really strongly about it. I do think it's had as big an impact as the invention of electric and steam power and light. I really believe that. But on the other side of it, what I believe it's doing is that it is retraining people's brains.
There's an argument that not social, I can see all of the downsides of social media in regards to, I don't think we were ever meant to know what everybody we know is doing all of the time. I think that's a crazy thing that we've got to that point. But in terms of it allowing the communication kind of, that as much as that is crazy, also knowing that, just kind of being able to keep up with people is a good thing. being able to build relationships with people across the world, being able to run a business that isn't reliant on a massive marketing budget, or go into a marketing company and you can actually build. Like, I think as much as, you know, I've highlighted some of the negatives, I'm an example of the fact that, you know, I didn't have to go out there and approach a marketing company to say, okay, can you help me build this brand? You know, if you're doing something well, when you put it out there, a lot of the time they say the cream rises to the top, and you can create a brand for yourself at a reasonable budget if you're doing things well. So I think that there's definitely give and takes for social media in property, but I think, you know, every business should have an element of social media because it is effectively your shop window for your business. And we're here to talk about your business, which, well, we're here to talk about you and your business. So the name in itself, Property Planning Gain. For those that don't know, what does planning gain mean?
Okay, so planning gain is buying something without planning permission or with planning permission and creating an uplift in the value through your expertise in gaining a better planning permission or planning permission. So for example, at the house we live in Northwest England, we've turned a 3-bedroom house into a 5-bedroom house plus a loft, which has created the planning gain. The stuff I do is taking a site that might be 1 acre, which is the size of a football pitch, an adult pitch, and getting planning permission for 50 flats. So that is property planning gain. It's making the gain before you even build it.
Yeah, so it's effectively a difference between what the site is worth as it is with just as a site. So as a car park, as a field, as, you know, we'll talk about different types of sites, but from you know, conception, stage 1 with no plans, to what it's now worth with those proposed plans. So whether that be 9 new build houses, 50 flats, or whatever the case may be, and your profit margin is derived between the difference between the two minus your cost of achieving those plans.
Yeah,
Yep.
correct. And I think it's important to acknowledge that in my view, you make proper money buying without planning permission.
Because effectively, when you buy with planning, people will know what it's worth. Like to a degree, you know, if you buy a site, let's say for example, that's got planning for 5 flats, and you know those flats are worth £200,000 each, to use round numbers, that's £1 million. If you then know that, okay, your build cost is going to be a further £200,000, it means, okay, people will then determine, I'm going to allow you to make this much profit, so I'm going to sell it at 600,000. So by the time you pay stamp duty, cost of finance is £100,000 for you to make. Whereas when you buy with planning, you're not paying that premium for the potential because you're going to take the risk.
Yeah, correct. And you know, and that final point you've made is that I'm not going to pay someone for what I could do, which is get planning permission, and it just requires a set of expertise. And this is when you come into having the right people around you, because all it really needs is a good planning consultant and a good architect for you to buy something without planning permission.
So let's talk about the journey of buying something without planning, because obviously there's loads of property sources, there's loads of sites, there's loads of, you know, how do you determine it's worthwhile taking a site to one of these experts, so to a planning consultant or to an architect, or at what stage do you get them involved? Like, what does the timeline of buying a site without planning look like?
So we've set up an internal system where every time we get offered an opportunity, and I call it opportunity because it's not a deal. A deal is a deal. Just want to clarify, an opportunity is something to look at that may or may not become a deal that makes money. And we have a checklist in the office, on the desks, and in my head, a box tick which goes through a list of test questions for the opportunity around stuff like, what is the value of the site now? what is the GDV, which is gross development value. So if it's residential and you think you can get 5 houses, what is the value of the 5 houses when you've got planning and you've built it? Is the type of land suitable to get planning permission? Is there a river running at the back of it, which is called flood risk? And is it near a station or a bus stop and local amenities? That's the base model. That process takes 15 minutes. From the point of the agent picking the phone up and saying, we've got this, what do you think? So it's a 15-minute process. And if those boxes are ticked in favour of the model, it then goes to the next stage, which is an architect or design practice who will drive my brief, because I think it's important to understand what your exit strategy is. Because there are a lot of residential exit strategies. There's houses, there's flats, there's student accommodation. Those are the big 3, right? There's HMOs, there's existing buildings, there's land. And at that point, I'm ready to engage with a planning consultant and an architect.
Okay. And so potentially either you've found one yourself or somebody's bought you a plot of land to say, look, we think there's some potential here. You've done your initial due diligence, which you said, can take 15 minutes because you've got the processes in place to make sure that it ticks a number of boxes. At that point that you said, it ticks enough of these boxes to do further due diligence, you would then have a conversation, because you might have in your head, okay, I think loosely we could get this many units. But then you then need to bring on board the experts to say, look, this is what I think, how viable is this scheme and where would your specifics come into it? Now at that point, so when do you now, because are you just going to buy these sites? Like once you've sort of had that conversation, at what point do you put an offer in? Or is it an offer? Or is it an option? Like where do you go from there?
I think what we'll do, let's take a step back. And I've learned this during COVID. And the rule is that we don't even look at anything until we know we're going to buy it. Because I used to do that running around thing, right? And looking at everything. You know that thing, right? What's that? Like the headless chicken routine, right? Okay. And until it's ticked all the boxes and we have submitted an offer that we believe is acceptable, which is how we do it, then we go and look at it. So the submission of the offer. If this is a direct to vendor strategy, which we probably do 250 to 400 letters a month, nationwide, I've done for 3 years. If it's one of those, I've probably driven the whole deal before we're going to submit an offer with the landowner. So I've already established that we can do it subject to planning. Let me explain what subject to planning is. So buying something that hasn't got planning permission, but agreeing a contract to buy it only when you get planning permission, which minimises your exposure at the beginning of the deal. Because typically what you're providing is a small non-refundable deposit called hurt money or skin in the game. And that could be an option agreement. An option agreement is giving either the landowner or the developer the option to buy it at any time with conditions in the contract.
So it'll be like a pre-agreed price for a certain duration of time that you have to be able to buy that property, and during that time you would be doing either your relevant due diligence or planning application to make sure that it's viable for you to proceed. And effectively they're all ways of you mitigating your risk as number one, but also mitigating the amount of capital you have to put in day one, because the cost of that option or the hurt money for the subject to planning, which are quite similar, are a lot less than your deposit, your stamp duty, and X, Y, or Z for going ahead. But you buy on both bases. You'll buy on options, and you also buy without planning.
Yeah, unconditional. Yeah, as well. So people talk about option agreements a lot. Let's just kind of go into what an option agreement really means financially. And what it means is, and there's also a conditional contract.
Yeah.
People confuse it. A conditional contract is similar to an option, but an option in my world is going to be longer term. As I've got older, I've realised that I need to be doing deals that are going to bring me money within a reasonable time frame, and not just go out and run around getting option agreements for 10 years on sites I might not be around.
Okay, so you're saying, so give us if you were to give us like, the actual difference between a, what do you say, option agreement and conditional
contract, yeah. So an option agreement, I believe, are longer term, and there might be a clause in it that says even when you get planning, you don't need to buy it. Or it might say that the seller can call upon you at any time to buy it within a certain time frame. It's all about being in control, and it's all about securing a position.
And I guess one thing is that, for people that are looking at potentially maybe structuring deals with option agreements or an unconditional offer or subject to planning, effectively what you need to be making sure that you do is you get value for anything that you're offering. So if you're offering an unconditional offer, that should be at a lower price point than if you're offering something subject to planning, because you've taken more risks, so as such you get more of a reward. And I think that's effectively when we talk about the position that you put yourself in. If you offer the landowner favourable terms, so i.e. they can call on you to buy at any time, that should be a better price point than if you put yourself in a position of power. And I think that's one thing that, in business and in negotiation, a skill that's really important in property development, in business as a whole, is actually understanding how to negotiate well, and also the art of negotiation as a whole.
Yeah, and then that's going to come down to communication.
And confidence in communication. So to be able to get your point across, ask for what you want, but remain, respectful and personable in that conversation.
And then that comes down to mindset, where you believe you can go. Because I know we're going off topic a bit here, but it's all connected. So a lot of people on my property development training program, they're in their 20s. So when we go at the end of it, we try and create a model for them based on what money can they raise, what mates have got a few quid, who's the investors, what area they live in, what they want to do. And the theme of it is quite interesting, because they all believe that they should start off by doing 2 houses or 3 flats. And my answer to that is, are you really going to make enough money for your time? And don't you think you have the skill sets now and the right people around you to maybe do 4 houses and 5 flats? It's just a very interesting psychology of being all in.
Yeah, so when we talk about all in, I guess the other thing that people potentially are considering this as a vocation would be what, in terms of capital, the type of deals that we're talking about. So let's say, let's just for argument's sake, let's take a number out of the air. Let's say we've got a site that, there's asking price of £500,000. And you want to go and get planning on that site. Now, what sort of capital would you say, if somebody was going to do it potentially on an option or subject to planning, what sort of capital would require to be able to actually execute that as a deal?
Sure. So we have a rule, and it works. It's tried and tested. On a lot size of £500,000, the maximum deposit we'd give would be 5%. So let's call it, you got a £25,000 exposure to sign, let's call it an option.
Yeah.
Okay. And what that means is that is non-refundable. and you have secured a position on that site, let's say the owner's given you 18 months to get planning, because it takes time to get planning, as we know.
It does,
and it's getting longer. And in my head now, for £25,000, I've got a site.
Because you secured that site, you have.
I've got myself a position
you
because I've
site.
exchanged contracts. And exchanging contracts in simple terms means that it's a legally binding agreement that the owner can't do anything with it until the contract date expires, which is called a long stop date, which is longer than the completion date. And I can now go out and start my planning process. So let's take a £500,000 site, and for this exercise we're going to say that we think we can get 7 houses. Okay, we're not going to go into the value of the houses and what you could potentially make. We're going to look at what your financial exposure is. Your £25,000 deposit, and your lawyers probably charged you £5,000 to go through that legal process to secure your position. You're in for £30,000. You've already costed that your planning application, your planning journey costs, as it is called, because it's your journey in planning, is going to cost you £25,000.
And just for arguments, not like, because it's an imaginary deal. But what makes up that 25,000 in regards to fees? What things are there that people can expect to have to pay for?
So there'll be a standard set of reports that the local authority will want you to undertake to validate the planning application. A validation is the date the clock starts ticking on your application. That's what you wait for, don't you? You wait for your validation letter and then you set the timer, right? So it could be a flood report.
It could be day and night survey.
Ground conditions.
Got all sorts.
The design of the houses by the architect, because we're saying we're going for full planning permission here. And your planning consultant's fees. So that makes up your £25,000 planning costs.
Pause. Stop. Sorry, quick intermission. As we have no sponsors, you're the sponsor right now, so subscribe to this video if you're enjoying it. Also, if you haven't already, like, comment, all that good stuff. Now, back to the video. So what other costs are involved in actually this planning, the planning journey?
Okay, so you've got your exchange deposit, which we've used £25,000 as an example on this, but in reality, you could use smaller sums of money, 10k, 5k, 15k. Got your planning costs, your lawyer's fees to secure your position with the legally binding contract. So our exposure, let's call it, is £55,000. But remember, we don't own it, but we've exchanged a contract which gives us legal rights over it.
And that remaining 25,000, so we spoke about, potentially different surveys, so whether it's a soil sample, topographical, etc., all the different surveys that could be involved in making sure that your application is viable. Now, once you've done that and you get planning, what's the next stage?
So we will look to de-risk the deal. So let's just explain what de-risking is. Is you're constantly trying to take your risk out of a deal by what you're paying for it, what deposit you're giving at the beginning, what your planning costs are, and who's going to buy it at the end, your exit strategy. So we're looking to de-risk throughout the whole process, and what we'll do is, when we've submitted the planning application, or even just before that, when we've exchanged contracts, so when it's secure legally, there's nothing to stop you going to the market Picking up the phone to a local developer you probably know buys 5 houses, 6 houses, sub 10 houses, or an agent you know that's got developers on the books, and saying to them, I'm in planning, I've got this site, make some phone calls, let's sell it off market, which is what we do with everything. We buy off market, we sell off market. My explanation of off market is something that hasn't been advertised in the public domain or on portals.
Okay. And so when you say you sell, do you ever, generally with your types of deals, with these planning games, do you ever complete on the contract itself? Like, how do you exit?
Okay, so there are developments I've built historically, the new build stuff, I've done office to resi, a number of units office to resi, which we completed. We bought the buildings, we acted as developer contractor, and they were sold as a developer would operate. The example we're giving here, we've now got planning permission. You've still got 6 months left on your contract date, and your exposure is still £55,000.
Yeah.
But you've got planning, and your agent, your mate, who you know is strong in South East London, has got you a buyer for £650,000.
Yeah.
With the planning. We're then going to get into contract unconditionally with the buyer because it's got planning for £650,000, but we still don't own it.
Yeah.
Because we don't have to buy it yet, because the date that you have to complete still hasn't been met.
Yeah, you haven't met your non-stop completion.
Correct. So on the day we are supposed to complete, we will complete, it's called a subsale. A subsale is a sale underneath the main contract. Sub means below or underneath in Latin. And on the day of completion, that's when the magic happens, Kazy.
Talk us through the magic.
And the magic is, you've sold it to your buyer, but it's a sub-sale. The money you get into your lawyer's account, the £650,000, £500,000 of it goes into the owner's account who you've done the option or the conditional contract with, and then you have your 150,000 left at the end of the day at 5 o'clock.
And that's it. And I think effectively what you've done is, because if you look at that as an example, you had to put in £55,000 to take you from A to Z in that journey of that purchase or that deal. However, your return on investment is circa 95,000. So you're looking at close to a 200% return on investment. So in terms of the use of capital, it's really, really good. Now, let me caveat that by saying, obviously the risk is potentially higher because you have the exit only if you get the planning. However, it depends on your individual attitudes towards risk. And if you are looking to get into property development or property investment, and you potentially have a slightly lower capital amount to do so, this could be something that could work really well. We spoke earlier off camera about, based on average property prices in London, you're looking the better part of potentially 100k to get a buy-to-let property in London by the time you include your stamp duty and your legal fees, maybe furnishing the property and your 25% deposit. So, and on that property, obviously you own the asset, it's a longer term investment, different type of asset class and different type of investment strategy, but your return on investment is going to be nowhere near the example you've just given. And I think the actual example has many parodies of being the rent to rent of property investment, in that when you look at the headline things, you making money off an asset that you never technically actually own, making money off a long-term contract on an asset that you don't also own, and also reducing the amount of capital you put in day one. So do you think it could be accurate to say that, that planning gain deals have a lot of comparables to potentially rent to rent, or the benefits of some of rent to rent?
Yeah, I mean, whilst I haven't done rent to rent, I've spoken to enough people that have called me up and booked a discovery call for the training program about development, who have made a few quid in rent to rent and now want to use that to do this. That is a fantastic comparison that you've made, because it's the same principle. You are basically securing a position with a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And the piece of paper in rent to rent is a lease.
Yeah.
And the piece of paper in planning gain is a contract of sale.
And although, it's all about, we spoke at the beginning about communication skills and negotiation skills. Now, although we spoke about the 25,000, for argument's sake, as a 5% cost for your option agreement, often the time we talk about in rent to rent, we say, okay, you know what, your deposit to the landlord is going to be X, maybe rent advance, furnishing cost to convert it to a HMO, and your startup costs are going to be 5 to 10,000. But there's also people that have done deals where, because of what they've negotiated with said landlord, they've put in zero. And there's also people that have negotiated options agreement for £1. Now, I'm not saying you can do that every day. I'm not saying, because that is your unicorn deal. That's your amazing deal that you find every now and again. But it's that conversation around, okay, if you want to get into property and are committed to becoming an investor or a developer or a property trader, that capital is important. Let's not pretend money isn't important, but there is also multiple ways to structure deals with creative finance, with thinking slightly outside the box and working that little bit harder.
So one of the barriers of entry that people believe exists with what we do is the financial upfront cost. And we've done the option for £1 scenario, where we've said, give it to us for £1, but I'll pay your legal fees.
And it's negotiation. Give it to us for £1 and I'll give you a bit more off the back end. And there's always, it's all about negotiation. Like, there's no such thing as, although you have a contract and the contract's black and white, that black and white is made up of a load of different words. And those words, you put them together in a way that makes sense for you and for me to go ahead and do business where it's going to be mutually beneficial. And I think that's what it comes down to a lot of the time in property. Now, you've got your course. What's the name of the course?
So it's the Property Planning Gain Property Development Training Program.
Okay. And if people want to find you, reach out to you, because some people are going to be watching this on YouTube, some people are going to be listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, etc. So where exactly can they find you?
Sure. So go onto my Instagram page at Property Planning Gain, click on the link in the bio to book a discovery call with me, which is a 15-minute call on suitability and description of the training program. Go onto the website, propertyplanninggain.co.uk. Click on any of the discovery call pages, book a call with me, reach out and see whether property development's for you.
Great stuff. Well, I mean, we're also going to make sure that below we have the link in the description to this video, so you can also find out how you could potentially book in that discovery call. Before we let you go, before we let anybody go on the Property by Kazy podcast, we ask them one key question. And you can choose how you answer it, but it's the question that I get asked all of the time, which is, I'm a young person and I want to get into property. What advice would you have for them?
So I'm just going to give the advice of what I did when I started out at 21, was that I started to surround myself with people that were older than me and were more experienced than me that were in property.
I think that's some really good advice. Obviously, they always talk about your circle and your power team and your network, and that's definitely something. So make sure you get the right people around you effectively that are doing what you want to do in the future.
That's it.
That's it. Well, that has been another episode of the Property by Kazy podcast with Jerome from Property Planning Game. If you have enjoyed this episode, make sure you like this video. If you really enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We're going to have another amazing guest next week. In the comment section, if there's anybody we haven't had on yet that you want to have on, let us know in the comment section. Again, we appreciate you and we'll catch you next week.